Studies Department. Yat A She Sierra Eddie Nusha Koganishla, Kipachini Bashichin, Torichini Dashache, Dog Klasafana Dashnala, Akot Ego de Netzan Nishlan, Kinflane, Do Bensa de Nasha, UC Berkeley Ethnic Studies Department de Inchtap. So I am also the coordinator of the Berkeley Center for New Media's Indigenous Technologies program. And I want to begin with the land acknowledgement. You see the Center for, the Berkeley Center for New Media, BCNM, is an interdisciplinary research center that studies and shapes media transition and emergence from diverse perspectives. Through critical thinking and making, we cultivate technological equity and fairness in our classrooms, in our communities, and on the internet. We recognize that BCNM is located in the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone peoples, specifically the confederated villages of the Shan. The history of the prolific technological development in this region has always depended on this land, and all of our technological infrastructures and activities take place on and in relation to this land. We commit to supporting the sovereignty and ongoing stewardship of this place by Ohlone peoples through building long-term reciprocity and relationships with tribal leaders and organizations. I also want to acknowledge the current colonial violence taking place in Gaza. As an Indigenous scholar and coordinator of the Indigenous Technologies program, this is something I cannot ignore. Today's event is part of the BCNM's Indigenous Technologies program, which engages questions of technology and new media in relation to global structures of indigeneity, settler colonialism, and genocide in the 21st century. Our Indigenous tech events and ongoing conversations with Indigenous scholars and communities aim to critically envision and reimagine what a more just and sustainable technological future can look like. We highlight Indigenous engagements with robotics, computer science, telecommunications, artificial intelligence and virtual reality, social media, online activism, video games, and much more. And a quick thank you to our co-sponsors for tonight's event, the Arts Research Center, who has graciously welcomed us into their wonderful space, and the Department of Music, the Department of Ethnic Studies, and the Department of Art Practice. We appreciate the support. And now to introduce Raven Chacon, our speaker tonight. Recently named the 2023 MacArthur Fellow, Raven Chacon is a Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, performer, and installation artist from Fort Defiance, Navajo Nation. As a solo artist, Chacon has exhibited, performed, and had works performed at LACMA, the Renaissance Society, San Francisco Electronic Music Festival, Red Cat, Vancouver Art Gallery, Hosder, Coltrane, Borealis Festival, Site at Santa Fe, Chaco Canyon, and Times Festival, and the Kennedy Center. As a member of Post Commodity from 2009 to 2018, he co-created artworks presented at the Whitney Biennial, Documenta 14, Carnegie International 57, as well as the two-mile-long land art installation, Repellent Fence. A recording artist over the span of 22 years, Chacon has appeared on more than 80 releases on various national and international labels. His 2020 Manifest Destiny opera Sweet Land, co-composed with Du Yun, received critical acclaim from the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the New Yorker, and was named the 2021 Opera of the Year by the Music Critics Association of North America. Since 2004, he has mentored over 300 high school Native composers in the writing of new string quartets for the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Project. Chacon is also the recipient of the United States Artist Fellowship in Music, the Creative Capital Award in Visual Arts, the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation Artist Fellowship, the American Academy's Berlin Prize for Music Composition, the BME's Center's Re-Coneco Award, the Foundation for Contemporary Arts Grants to Artists Award, and finally the Pew Fellow in Residence. His solo artworks are in the collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Smithsonian's American Art Museum, and National Museum of the American Indian, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Getty Research Institute, and the University of New Mexico's Art Museum, and various private collections. Please join me in welcoming Raven Chacon.
Yeah, Sarah. It's rare that I do a talk and fellow Danae gets to introduce me and I get to collaborate with them on presenting and doing a Q&A, and so thank you for having me. Raven Chacon initié, todo chin initié, nakai Danae bashis chin, kiani dashinale, nakai Danae dashiche, chinle, de nasha. The talk was, I think it said, what gets amplified? And that's a PowerPoint I've been traveling with for about 6 years now. And it's pretty outdated. But that's just what it's called. That's what the file is called, what gets amplified. And I switch it around days before, sometimes last minute, like just now. I brought some extra photos and I put it in there. To try to, custom tailor it to the place that I'm speaking at and the folks that I'm speaking to. And so this is called Indigenous Technologies, and then I started thinking, why did they invite me? I don't know what that means. I'm guessing maybe there could be discussions about notation. I don't use this word hacking, but my former collaborator Cristobal Martinez would say maybe there's a hacking of music, of classical music. But I like to use technologies that fail. I don't think that was an intention. I'll show you in a while, but I think for me that ended up being the mode of making music. And so in the PowerPoint called What Gets Amplified, it always starts with the same slide, which is the first artwork that I made, or that I'm not afraid to show anybody. And it's a piece called Field Recordings. The other reason I start with it is it tells information about where I come from. And so what Field Recordings is myself going to 3 different sites in the Southwest, 2 of them on the Navajo Nation, and I would go and record these places that I consider to be very quiet places at quiet times of day. And there was no cars on the highway, no airplanes in the sky, no people, no tourists around. I would even stand far away from the microphone so that I wouldn't be captured by it. I even buried the recording device in case somehow that would get picked up as well. And then I would go back to the studio and play it back. And when I'd play it back, I'd turn it all the way up. Start with that one to test the sound systems in different universities and institutions. Sandia Mountains. into Shea, Arizona. I grew up at the mouth of this canyon in a town called Chinle. So these are new slides. I just put these in right before the talk. I'm working on a book of past works. And so I didn't have photos for these before, so I went back to my home and, well, my storage unit in Albuquerque and tried to find these things to take photos of. So I have photos of these now. And I've never really shown them before. They'll be in the book, but I don't think anybody's really seen these in like 20 years. So these were instruments I made, and I don't even have recordings of some of these because, well, because they broke while I was on tour, because I played them every night. But you can hear them on early recordings of mine. This one was a sleep machine in the 70s and 80s. You know, there was this thing you put by your bed that had a waterfall sound or a rainforest sound or whale sounds or desert wind sounds. And you push, you turned it on to go to sleep. My parents had one. This one isn't theirs. This one I found at the Goodwill. And I started making connections that weren't supposed to happen. So, putting the ocean in the desert, putting the whale in the rainforest. This is a snare drum that plays itself with a guitar pickup, and it gets fed back into a speaker that vibrates the head of the drum when you push. It's not played like a drum though. It's played like the voice, so as it vibrates and moves around a feedback loop, you push the head of the drum and it changes the singing pitch. This is a Sony Walkman that got run over, and I wired a headphone output cable to where the tape head should be. And then you can stick anything into that headphone jack, and then using the headphone output, send the signal back out, and it just sounds terrible. This is an antler I found, a white-tailed deer antler in the mountains of Jemez, New Mexico. And it has a contact mic embedded into it, and when I scrape it on glass, it plays a chord. Somebody asked me, I'm in town because I had a concert Friday at the Grace, or no, Saturday at the Grace Cathedral. And I had to do a Q&A with the Reverend the next morning as part of the gig. And he asked me what my favorite sound is. And I think I avoided this question, but I'm going to tell you guys. I was on the spot. I was really nervous as the Reverend, right? I always carry a recording device in my pocket when I go travel. And it's just another set of ears for me to pick up the things that there would be no way for me to register as I'm hearing. And I still go teach very often back in the Navajo homelands. I go to Chinle a lot. I teach high school out there, the string quartet program that Sierra was talking about. And my grandparents were living out there until recently. But when I would drive out there, I would stick a recording device out the window and drive at different speeds in the desert, down the highway. 60 miles per hour sounds like one kind of sound. 50 miles per hour is a different sound. Doesn't matter what the weather's like outside, or it might not even matter if it's a dirt road or a paved road. This instrument here is a drum going into from one cable is that recording of the wind sticking out the window of the car. It goes into this vacuum cleaner attachment, and inside of that vacuum cleaner attachment is a photocell. Whatever signal gets sent through the vacuum cleaner attachment can only go out the other end if light hits it. I then shine the flashlight into the vacuum cleaner tube to create a Drum Grid is a composition I made in 2010 for, do you know her? Sage Bond. She's a Dene musician and a former student of mine. That's her in that photo. Drum Grid is a composition for numerous drummers, each positioned on a street corner, beginning with a single drum hit from one player. Subsequent drummers imitate the sound of the previous drummer down the block, with the gesture evolving as it travels around the neighborhood. Over time, the performers misinterpret their cues and source material, therefore adding new gestures to the original musical action, as nearby buildings, houses, and other structures create more false echoes and polyphony. By performing Drum Grid, a community has agency to change the landscape of their neighborhood, activating potential questions and new generative urgencies. So that's a map of how Drum Grid could be enacted. There's a picture of some drummers in Oslo, Norway, performing this piece. And I'll play a bit of this video. From 2009 to 2018, I was a member of a collective post-commodity. That was a collective of various members, all of us based in the Southwest. So I kept this one in the PowerPoint because I consider it to be a clock. It's a piece called My Blood is in the Water. And the reason I call it a clock is it tells time in 3 different ways. First, as a sundial. Secondly, blood drips from the deer's mouth every 15 seconds onto an amplified drum. And then third, with all of its elements, all gathered from around the city of Santa Fe, it tells the story of that spot. So starting with the logs taken from the trees, from the nearby mountains, aiming up to the sky, referencing a time when no humans existed in that spot. Maybe even no animals, just the trees, just the plants. And then further down, you have that mule deer that's representing the animals in the area. And inside of that deer, you have blood, being the people that were then living there. And that dripping, having a long, uninterrupted lineage until it hits the head of the drum, and that being when the Spanish came to that area. And that mixing around, pooling together, becoming a new people who were living there, and that then dripping back off into the ground. Those instruments I showed earlier, they were all, well, they weren't intended to sound like that. I mean, I think I was actually trying to get a better sound out of those, but didn't really know what I was doing, so they ended up being something else. And some of them failed. I mean, they only worked for like 4 gigs or so. Then I'd have to fix it again. The snare drum didn't initially look like that. It was much more classier, but I had to keep fixing it and fixing it. And so this idea of inefficient or ineffectual objects was something that we were discussing a lot in post-commodity. And when I joined the group, we were starting to think about using this object here, this bird repellent product, as some kind of, I don't know, something. We didn't know what it could do or what we could use it for, but we were fascinated by it. These colors in it that were that had different significance to each of our tribes. For me, I see a story of vertical emergence when I look at this balloon, just in the shape, let alone it being a balloon. So we'd buy these things off, I'm not going to say the word Amazon, but you all know that that's Amazon. Well, it says it right there, ships by Amazon. Gift wrap. The idea with these balloons is you're supposed to stick them in the tree and they scare away pigeons. We bought them and they didn't work, but we wanted to test it. We were thinking, you know, every now and then the bird would look at it and be like, okay, no, I'm good. But we thought if a 10-inch diameter balloon could scare away pigeons, then maybe a 10-foot diameter balloon could ward off Western civilization. And so we started making these giant ones. And so this one we flew over Sheriff Joe Paiaso's headquarters in downtown Phoenix. For those who remember, he was the racist, anti-immigrant sheriff, Maricopa County. So we just fly these as like guerrilla actions. Obviously the balloon can perform. Started making more of them. We started calling them the repellent eye. And so this one actually wasn't supposed to be too repellent. This one was done with collaboration of the Manitoba Hydro Corporation in Winnipeg, Canada, which is the corporation in charge of monitoring the water use of the whole province of Manitoba. And so this eye was made to make one remember that, you know, the people are the ones who should be watching over their natural resources, and that role should not be given to a corporation. But really these were just studies, tests, see how much helium cost, see how much helium we needed to fly one of these. Because what we're working towards was a piece called the repellent fence. And the idea behind the repellent fence was it was going to interact with the US-Mexico border. And I think I have time to tell a little bit more of the story. Sometimes I skip this slide. But because of Sheriff Joe, we wanted to do this project in Arizona. The idea behind the project was to trace the longitudinal lines and relationships that indigenous people had had in the area before the border wall existed. And not only that human movement, but the movement of water, of animals. And so, yeah, I'll tell this story. We wanted to do it in Arizona. We'd started all the way in the west. You see there it says Barry Goldwater Air Force Range. They wouldn't let us do it there. The more east we came, you see the Oregon National Monument, the mountains. It was too difficult to go up in the mountains and do this piece there. A little bit more east of that is a bird sanctuary. We couldn't do it there, obviously. We kept going. Where we really wanted to do this was the Tohono O'odham Reservation. That's a tribe that's recognized on both sides of the border, and that's a tribe very much interrupted by the politics of that line. When we went there, they were the first place we went, and when we went there, they said, you know, we really appreciate the gesture and meaning of your project, but let's go for a drive. And so we went, and they said, you see that cactus right there? I said, yeah, I see a cactus. Looked like it was eaten by birds. Had a whole bunch of holes in it. They said, go up to that cactus. I walked up to that cactus. There was a camera inside the cactus. They said, you can see why we don't want any more eyes on us out here. So we didn't ask. We didn't pursue that site to do this piece. We kept going east, and that's where you see all the "Don't Tread on Me" flags, right? You see all of the Minutemen militia types. And so we thought, okay, maybe we could do it here. You know, the balloons will get shot down, but hey, you know, it's less helium we got to buy. And so I won't go deep into that, especially if this is being recorded. But yeah, it was very heavy to start considering that, and we realized that it's actually much more complicated than just the bad guys of the far right. And we were running out of space. We went more and more east, and we ended up in the community of Douglas, Arizona, and its sister city, Agua Prieta. We had some friends there, artists, and they said, why don't you do it here? And they said, we know the mayor. I said, really? I said, yeah, he's just sitting right there at the coffee shop. You can see him out the window. I was like, okay. So we went and talked to him, and they said, yeah, let's do it. You guys have money? And we said, yeah, we got the creative capital. And so I said, great, well, let's do it. So it was like that. It was just, why not? Let's just do it. We said, well, there's the other side of the border, which we thought was going to be a huge, obstacle. And even before that, we were thinking, okay, well, the federal government's not going to let us do this, the Border Patrol. And they were right. I mean, that was going to cause a bunch of headaches, but they said, well, the federal government manages the actual wall, but we're the city of Douglas, the town of Douglas, and across the way is Agua Prieta. So we're the ones who you would need to ask. And so that solved that problem. We didn't really even have to talk to Border Patrol because this was all within the jurisdiction of the municipality. And so in collaboration with both of these sister cities, this ended up becoming not really the guerrilla intervention we had planned, but became more of a collaborative community project of us having the excuse of a land art installation to make a collaborative piece where we were able to have representatives, artists, community members from both sides working together to put this piece up. And that, in its own way, demonstrated that suturing we were wanting to show had been lost between both people on both sides of the border. What gets amplified? I went to Standing Rock in 2019 for a couple of reasons. I was researching this, which is called an LRAD, a long-range acoustic device, which is basically a sound cannon which can carry sound for 7 miles. And you surely do not want to be in the path of it. And I heard that these were being used at Standing Rock. And so because I was researching these things, I wanted to go and see if I could get one aimed at me and hear what it was sounding like. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But they did make an appearance, apparently. The other reason I went to Standing Rock was because I was at home, felt an urgency to go and be another body out there, but I also didn't know what the hell was going on. I was hearing all this noise, if you will, on social media, Facebook, regular media, news that we were supposed to trust, and I just couldn't tell what was happening. At one point I heard that people were being fired upon. I didn't know if that was true. I was hearing conflicting stories from people who were even there. Couldn't tell what was exaggeration, hyperbole, a tactic of misinformation perhaps to bring more people there or to bring awareness of where it could go. So anyway, I had to go there. And I'll stop talking about Standing Rock because I'm going to talk about it later. But I want to talk more about the LRAD. So the LRAD did make an appearance. Actually, my little sister's on top of that hill in that photo, and she said in this temperature, the LRAD was actually hot. When somebody would speak, get down off of the hill, it would be like heat, a weird heat. Like when you try to put your coffee in the microwave. I guess, I don't know. I didn't experience it, but that's my guess of what it felt like. So so Post Commodity wanted to use these in a piece. we contacted LRAD Corporation in San Diego, and we were, like, called them on the phone thinking that we had have some kind of, I don't know, some kind of military credentials or police credentials, but we just cold called them and said, we would like to buy an LRAD. And they said, sure, it's $15,000. Like, really? You can just buy one? He said, yeah, it's not a weapon. It can be used for public address. But we didn't have $15,000. So try not to plug Amazon or Google, but if you go to Google and type in LRAD and then go to shopping, and then it might send you to eBay. We found 2 of them on eBay for $3,000 each. And one of them was like the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department was selling it on eBay. I guess they broke the stand or something, and they had all this Homeland Security money. That's what we typed in the question, what's wrong with it? And they said, oh, we got a straight answer. I guess what had happened was they bought their LRAD with the Homeland Security money. The terrorists never came. They didn't need the LRAD anymore. They were just using it to play music at the public swimming pool. And I guess hopefully aiming it away from people. So we got them very cheap. We made a piece called "The Ears Between Worlds Are Always Speaking." The ears between worlds are always the ears between worlds are always speaking is a long-form, 2-channel hyperdirectional sound work projected upon the ancient ruins of Aristotle's Lyceum, broadcasting for 100 days during Documenta 14, which took place in both Kassel, Germany and Athens, Greece. The Ears Between Worlds was an all-day opera consisting of 22 songs, the libretto gathered from the narratives of refugees from Syria and Afghanistan who have arrived in Greece, stories of migrants who have traversed the desert of the US-Mexico borderlands, as well as stories from the Navajo Long Walk and the Cherokee Trail of Tears. Both of those instances where the US government was trying to kill us. And so we put 2 LRADs up. To tell you briefly about the site, this was in Athens, Greece. The building you see across the way there is the Athens Conservatory of Music. In 1996, the Conservatory of Music was wanting to expand in this empty lot. Between the conservatory, the War Museum, and the Hellenic Officers' Banquet Hall, which is the building you see there. And when they started digging, they found the ruins of Aristotle's school. And there wasn't many structures there. You see this area right here was some sort of library, but the main feature of the Lyceum is the path that Aristotle and his students would walk. And this idea of peripatetic learning, where you would learn as your feet moved across the earth and you were in motion. And so the idea of this piece is to repurpose the LRAD, mastering the volume extremely low and composing songs with the narratives that Post-Commodity gathered on both sides of the world. And so here's one of these songs here. I think I'm running out of time because we're going to also do a conversation, Sierra and I, so I'm going to go quickly through this project, which is almost a whole talk in itself, but it's a series of scores that I made for, which started as a dedication to this woman here, Zikalasha. Zikalasha is a Dakota composer who I came upon when I was researching about 20 years ago, trying to find early American Indian musicians who were working with standard music notation. Also given that that's my main tool of working with that notation as a language. And going to different archives around the country, BYU, Earlham College in Indiana, and then more and more there's been more biographies written about Zikalasha since as well in the past 20 years. Did I understand that this is a fascinating figure in not only American Indian history, but just in American history. An activist, she founded the National Council of the American Indian. She was advocating for Native people for the right to vote. She wrote fiction, she wrote poetry, she wrote political essays, she gave speeches. And here's a picture of the Sundance Opera here. An immense life and biography. I didn't know what kind of form to make this dedication to her in. What kind of musical form would be appropriate. Not only to tell the story of her life, but the complexities of being an Indigenous woman at the turn of the 20th century and having to navigate and speak for all the various Indigenous people that she might be seen as representing. And so, long story short, I changed the project to write music compositions in the form of one-page graphic scores that are portraitures of contemporary Native and First Nations women working in the 21st century, telling the story of how they navigated these times, and also speaking to not only their artistic life, but also the other kinds of work they're engaged in. Education, activism, other kinds of community leadership. Let me find one of these. This is an Odawa composer, Barbara Crowell. She's had a long career of composing chamber music. She's also had some health obstacles in her life and her career that have set her back. So this is for blowing the flute as long as possible 4 times. And doing so while singing, while humming, while whistling, and while hissing. I was wanting to write, I found, again, I wrote 12 of these. I actually wrote 13, but I removed the Buffy St. Marie slide today. But of the project, I was trying to find a woman from Mexico who identified as a sound artist and composer and as Indigenous. And of course, myself already knowing that this was going to be hard because the erasure in that country is so severe that people are discouraged from identifying their tribal identity and have become more of under the label of mestizaje. And so I was asking a friend of mine, Carmina Escobar, extended vocalist, mestiza, who lives in LA, to help me find somebody to write for. And she couldn't. and she does not identify as Indigenous. So I wrote this piece for her to tell about that surge and to tell about that erasure. And so the way you play this is to scream as quiet as possible in the shape. The black shapes are the shape of the scream. The white shapes are the shape of the mouth. The shape of the mouth becomes a mask. The triangles are reverse screams, taking the scream back into your body. And the last one I'll talk about, I made a book called Forzi Kalasha about the project. So if you're interested, you can request that the library here gets that book, or the bookshop gets the book. But also, somebody probably has a PDF online by now. And these are all performable. The musicians I wrote them for encourage anybody to perform these, which I highly appreciate. But I'll talk about this one. This is a piece for a violinist named Heidi Sinungatuk. Heidi Sinungatuk is a Nupiaq from Alaska. Her father is a celebrated artist, Ron Sinungatuk, who is a woodworker. He carves masks. When Heidi was growing up, she was sharing with me, she wanted to have a career where she played violin for the Anchorage Symphony. Somebody told her, you gotta be really good to do that. Discouraged her. She wanted to be a composer. Somebody told her, women don't really compose. She didn't do that. She wanted to work with wood like her father. Her family is very encouraging, but again, same story. Somebody said, yeah, why don't you go into like ethnomusicology or something? She did that, and she has a career as a scholar. But she's sharing this with me, and she's been a long-time friend of mine. So I wrote this piece for her. The way you play this piece, it's a little complicated for me to describe, so I'm sorry if I stumble. You have the 5-line staff. On the very top, you have a normal-looking 5-line staff that's empty. To perform this piece, you're asked to compose a melody on that top staff. You then take a piece of paper, stick it over this one, and trace the dots of that melody. Put that piece of paper behind this piece of paper, and trace those dots onto the 4 remaining staves. The 4 remaining staves are so warped that they are going to change the melody. The bottom staff is either a bird or a book. And I'm going to end pretty soon, but back to Standing Rock. When I was there with that field recorder in my pocket, capturing 10 days of people justifiably angry at the police, yelling to the construction crews of the DAPL pipeline, go home, leave, you don't have to be here. Leave us alone. Stop. Yelling at the top of their lungs. The day after Thanksgiving, there was an action that took place on what's called the Backwater Bridge. This was a bridge that goes from Standing Rock up to Bismarck, North Dakota. And the police had barricaded that to prevent people from coming to the encampment and preventing people, just making it overall difficult to come protect the water. And the Sunday after Thanksgiving, the eldest women of the camp walked up to the bridge. Everybody saw that this was very important. Some of the important elders were in this small group of women and followed them. I think there was about 500 of us that followed behind them as they walked up to the line where the police and the security were standing. And they walked right up to the line and didn't say anything, and stood there for about 20 minutes. So what you hear is 500 people being absolutely quiet. What you hear is, what I hear is the police not being able to look back. In fact, I hear the police looking down, ashamed at their own presence of being there. I hear them being outnumbered. And for the first time, I can hear the place. So this is a photo I took at that moment as well. I'm going to end pretty soon. The reason I was in town is we did the Bay Area premiere of a piece called Voiceless Mass that I wrote 2 years ago during pandemic. We have enough time, right? Okay. I like to tell the story of how this composition came about. It was a commission from a phenomenal new music organization in Milwaukee called Present Music, and very dedicated to experimental music. They wanted a new piece, and they asked me to write for them, which I was absolutely honored by that invitation. But I always got to ask, other than like, what are you going to pay me? When is it due? And they said, oh, it just needs to be due in time for our annual Thanksgiving Day concert. Okay, all right. That's cool, that's fine. I like Thanksgiving. Was it in 2 weeks or something, next week?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got no problem with Thanksgiving. I'm from the Southwest. We didn't have that same history as cousins on the East Coast. Plus I like to eat, I like to visit with family. Where's the gig at? I asked them. They said, oh, it's going to be in St. John's the Evangelist Cathedral. I said, oh shit, it's like two loaded situations right there. And they said, there's a church organ in there. I said, can I write for the church organ? They said, yeah, why not? And so I'm thinking about the situation of this. It's Indigenous Peoples Month or whatever, right? So it's like that's when the only time they ask for gigs or commissions. That's supposed to be our month off. Don't ask any Native people to do stuff in November. Kidding, I'm just kidding. So I really had to say something. I could not bypass this situation that I'm being asked to write for. And so I wrote a piece in the structure of a mass, of a vocal mass in the church music sense. But because the instrumentation did not allow for voices, I could not write for voices. Thinking about the organ's role is to be able to play the instruments that cannot be in attendance. You could say it was to replace the voice. The church organ is built literally into the walls of the institution. I was thinking a lot about, during that time, 2 years ago, there was a lot of activities around Confederate monuments in the South. Activists bringing down those symbols. And in the Southwest, we were also doing our own actions of bringing down the conquistador monuments. And so thinking about that role of the Catholic Church in suppressing the voices of my tribe, of Pueblo tribes, Pueblo cousins in the Southwest, and how that leads to a loss of language. And so this is the piece I wrote. It's called Voiceless Mass, and it has no voices in it. It's completely scored for a multitude of instruments, woodwinds, strings, and of course the center being the organ itself. The musicians are spread out around the church. This can only be played in a church because it calls for church organ. To attempt to show the individuality of the instrumentalists, and for them not to be included as a cluster of an ensemble. And so I'll play a short clip and then we'll do the Q&A. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks again, Raven. That was a really great talk. So I'm just gonna do or ask a couple questions or a few questions, and then transition to yeah, if anyone in the audience has questions that they'd like to pose to Raven. So yeah, I really appreciated all of your pieces, and I feel like there was definitely like a thread going along them, and obviously the show's or the talk's title is What Gets Amplified, and I was thinking about the role of the non-human and like the idea of vocalization, and thinking about the elements like the wind or the animal as a type of instrument, and I was wondering if you can speak a little bit to that, especially kind of repurposing like the field recording and being like practices that you did, like burying the recording device in the first few pieces that you showed. So yeah, I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, for a lot of for some of the installations, and then also a lot of my live solo performances, a lot of the content comes from field recordings, and those field recordings come from a lot of different places. They usually get run through whatever my setup is in a way where it's illegible what the original content is. But also my own methods of recording them, for the most part, strive not to be anthropological or documentary. The last thing I wanted at Standing Rock was for me to have like a boom mic, and sticking it in somebody's face. There was so much of that. There were so many documentary filmmakers there. I'm surprised there's not that many documentaries out there. You would think one of them would want a prize or something for everything that was happening there. There were so many different stories to be told there, but I wasn't seeking to do that kind of thing. I'm not a journalist. Yeah, I'm not an anthropologist. So there was some respect there, but also fidelity to me is it doesn't matter, even if it's going to sacrifice some of that information. I think it's more to see what else can be gathered, can be witnessed. I try really hard not to say captured, of course. Even that word, implies some kind of violence or myself taking something. I was there as a guest, But yeah, I think for me it's just again to have this other set of ears. I think to acknowledge that we don't perceive everything in real time. Maybe we're unaware. Maybe we're not tapped into that. But some of this technology can help. Some of this technology that allows for recall can be used for that, and I choose to use it to make music and make art.
Thank you. And on the subject of technology, a recent talk with the BCNM, or the Indigenous Technologies Program, we had Martina Broner, who talked about the repurposing of drones as a military technology for reconceptualizing Indigenous spatiality and visuality. And I definitely was thinking along the lines of that when you were speaking about Standing Rock and kind of retooling the LRAD, or like the sound cannon that you purchased with your group. And I'm wondering, so do you see this kind of repurposing of military technologies as, or like what do you see, like what are the potential things that can come out of doing stuff like that? And also how, would you say that's kind of doing a type of remapping, like either in the border zone when you were like outside of Phoenix, or also in like Standing Rock?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that doesn't start becoming my thing. I have no intention of using LRADs or any other kind of military technology or weapons anymore. I've already written a composition for guns. I've used other kinds of materials too that I think I probably would not revisit. But yeah, I mean, they're interesting. I think we had a conversation today about drones and the counter usage of drones. So that was something I witnessed at Standing Rock. Was that was one of the first sounds I heard, was just buzzing like an insect, and thinking, oh man, the cops are like looking at us now. Where am I going to use the bathroom? It's like, but then I realized they're counter drones. These were water protectors who had drones, and that was a beautiful relief in some way, thinking that we had access to these, or that they were ubiquitous enough that we could have that kind of power to counter some of these encroachments. And so yeah, I think I think just that we have access to this alone is something that's can be valuable for real world applications. Maybe through the post-commodity work, somebody then realized how easy it is to get these things. I know there's been artists who've written manuals on how to counter the LRAD, use of even like hyperbolic spheres or something to reflect it back. But yeah, it's. I think what we learned from that experience was just the policy and the labeling of that so-called tool, in that it's not being designated as a weapon. I think that's scary, right? I think that the claims of it being useful are ways to side skirt all the lawsuits of people being seriously injured for exercising their freedom of speech. out in the field, out in the park.
Yeah, I think I had no idea that these sound cannons existed, and I was thinking about like the deafening kind of like it's an attack on the senses, and that was really striking to me. But yeah, to move on to the notations, I was really, I think, yeah, I heard about your work from these notations originally, and I've always been struck by how you choose not to use like standard music notation in your compositions and opt for like the visual representations and often source from like Dene symbols and things. So yeah, can you talk about like what are your inspirations behind the visual representations and why that's like really important in tension with like what notations are and where they come from?
Yeah, I mean, every composition is different. Voiceless Mass, for the most part, uses standard Western classical notation. That is the, I think I wanted something very precise when I was making that piece. Something, you know, I knew likely the ensembles that would be involved in performing it, they might be folks who also are involved in playing the church's music. So I didn't want to make it inaccessible to play it. This had to be played as much as possible, and thankfully it got the prize, you know, Pulitzer, and now it gets played a lot. My fear with writing any of these is that it gets played once and that's it. And you know, we have that conversation once about what the piece is about. But my reasons for making graphic scores or making up my own notation is solely to solve a problem where standard notation is inadequate. Standard notation can't tell you, you know, where people are situated in a space. They can't tell you where the conductor should stand. They don't tell you who should play the piece. Or should, you know, some of these could be played by non-musicians. The drumming, the piece with the drummer on every corners of the intersection, that doesn't have to be a trained musician. So, you know, there's no reason to write that in notes. A lot of my compositions are very much site-specific, and so there might be a notation describing the circumstances around preparing for the performance of it. The two slides I showed in the beginning, these notations, talking to Sierra before the talk, where those came from. How much time do we have? Do we have this is a long story. Does anybody know a piece by Cornelius Cardew called Treatise? Some of you. Cool. That's like the ultimate graphic score. It's the ultimate graphic score where there's no instructions, I should say. You just play this. Now visual artists do all the time. They make a squid and say, play this. But composers were doing this too before that, you know. But I needed a good reason to do that, to make a score like that. I think every composer should make a score like that, a purely graphic notation composition. And so I was telling Sierra those shapes, those pictographs I've drawn up there, those came from two sources. Those came from me spending hours, nights, overnight, on the West Mesa of Albuquerque, amongst these volcanic rock. It's called the National Petroglyph Park. It wasn't a protected park back in the 90s. They were trying to build a freeway through it. Luckily, it is now protected. But those are drawings that are very old. They're from the ancestors of a lot of tribes that now consider themselves separate tribes. These are the ancestors of all of them. Meanwhile, living in Albuquerque, I lived about 60 miles south of Santa Fe, the epicenter of fake native art. And so I like to draw those too when I see them. You know, something I know is not authentic. I sketch that in the same notepad. And so I'm somewhere in between both of those, geographically and temporally maybe. And so in my own sketches, I found that these can have a musicality to them, and I can can solve some of these problems with, that I wasn't able to convey with standard notation. So they're not necessarily Dene, I mean, other than myself making some of them. You know, and then obviously the Kalesha scores, those had to be graphic notations. And a lot of my scores still incorporate regular notes, like the one I didn't show, well, the one for Heidi I showed, that's exploiting the staff, the systems, and the staff within those systems. But that's because that's the reason for using them, is to tell that story, so that there's opportunities for Western notation and you know, my own graphic notation to be narrative in those cases.
Thank you so much. So yeah, now we can open it up for audience questions, and I think there'll be someone with a mic to pass over.
Hey, thank you for the great talk. In the pieces that you started the talk with, the early pieces, recordings of quiet places, I'm curious for you how much of those recordings are about the place and how much are about the mics you're using and how much are about you. I guess I'm just curious, you know, for the audio, you know, for listening to it. Yeah, I'm wondering how much we're hearing of these kind of different ingredients. And I might add to that, you know, later on in the case of Standing Rock, I think you said in the recording you could hear the place. And I'm also curious if you had that thought after the fact, listening to the recording, or in the moment during recording.
Yeah, no, I listened to that recording. I knew the moment, I mean, I was there, and I knew that I had been witness to something that was heavy, you know, in real time. And I wasn't sure that the recording would have captured that power of what that moment was. But maybe part of your question is, have I turned that one up to its maximum? No, I haven't. I wouldn't want to think. I think it's already like as loud. That's the point. I already hear it as being a loud moment. To your first part of the question about what one hears in the other ones, I mean, I only played excerpts, like maybe 30 seconds. But they're much longer. They're about, I don't know, 20 minutes long in their entirety. And what I hear in them is different colors of these places, even though they just sound like noise, or like, you know, white noise or whatever. No, they have their own kind of, yeah, for lack of a better word, color of what's happening there. But they're also magnifications in the canyon to show when you can hear wind. You can hear, and I don't remember there being wind when I was doing it, which is beautiful, but maybe that's because I was inside the walls of the canyon. I don't know. But as you listen to them, yeah, every breeze becomes a tornado, and every dragonfly becomes a dragon.
Any other questions? I have one question actually too. I was wondering, after the Virgin Balloon project, what happened to all those balloons?
That's a good question. I left Post Commodity in 2018. I'm not sure. They're in a storage unit somewhere, I think. They're in a couple collections. I think Princeton Art Museum has one. The Walker has one. I couldn't tell you though. If you find out, let me know. We could never do that again, though. That won't happen again. It was a one-time thing. It only was up for 4 days. So, and the deer piece, the clock, my blood is in the water. That was only up for 4 days. So, I mean, that was another interesting thing to think about the temporality of these pieces, you know, the ephemerality. And trying to make it in every way different than what the wall wants to be. Different materials. Ours was much higher in height than the US-Mexico wall. It went in a different direction. But most importantly, it didn't pretend like it was going to be there forever.
On the fourth day, with the piece with the deer, did the blood continue to drip at the end of the fourth day?
It slowed down.
Okay.
We also served a stew at the opening from that deer. Our friend had shot that deer. All the materials came from the area.
Thank you. You didn't talk about Sweetland, and I wonder if I can ask you a question about that. I had the privilege of seeing that production right before COVID-19 happened, and I wonder if you can share a little bit about the process of working on that. And, you know, it was such an ambitious collaboration, and the execution was, I mean, from this audience standpoint, you know, it was very coherent, even though it was designed to interrupt the way that we experience a performance, you know, the way that it had these sort of multiple storylines that narrated different, you know, outcomes. So I just, anything you want to share about that project, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Roshi. Yeah, you're one of the few who got to see it. It was unfortunately closed halfway through its run because of COVID. And we premiered it in March of 2020, and by March 15th, it was everybody had to go inside. But it was an immense project. It was so immense. I mean, I was only half of the composing team. I shared the role with phenomenal composer Du Yun, who has her own complete style of composing, but you know, we were working on that music for years, and then working with the libretto by two brilliant poets, Douglas Kearney and Aja Kushwa-Duncan, who wrote the story. But and this all was brought together by Yuval Sharon, who's known for making these wild productions and operas in the Los Angeles area with his company called The Industry. And so, so he does these kind of non-linear, you know, non-conventional site productions. He did this piece that was opera that took place totally in cars. You got in a car, you got in a Corvette, drove around, some other people got in a bus, and the stories kind of aligned and misaligned. But what we were wanting to do is, we were calling this a manifest destiny opera. This was telling the story, again, of Thanksgiving, but conflating that with the stories of Pocahontas, Sacagawea, Malinche, and thinking of it as a forced marriage, but also a feast. If you bought a ticket, you didn't know which ticket, I think, right? You just ended up with whatever ticket, you might end up in one of these two storylines. So that was one storyline. The other storyline was the story of, I suppose, Lewis and Clark. You know, this movement from east to west to discover the United States. And so when you watch the first act of either of those storylines, you were seeing the story as if, you know, like it was taught to you in public school, you know. You have a myth of those histories. And there's an intermission, and then when you watch it again, it's a much more kind of nightmare version of what you should have learned. And so, yeah, it's a bit difficult to describe. You had to get two different tickets and go 2 different days to see the entire thing, but everybody saw the beginning together, which is the arrival of these visitors to this new land. We weren't making a historical opera, it was kind of this alternate universe situation. again, I don't even know if I like to call it alternate universe. I like to call it, to me, watching my own opera, it was like a nightmare. Like, you're like, what's going on? It felt like that. So it would shift very quickly into these different characters. The characters would turn into other characters. But I think there were some processes that were different than how a lot of opera companies work. I mean, we were able to contribute to what this story would be as composers, you and I. All of us on the team were able to contribute to the aesthetics and the look of this. Even though it was about Thanksgiving, we knew how bad that could look if it actually looked like Thanksgiving. You know? And in Yuval's tradition, this was performed outside. So on the grounds of what used to be a village called Yangwa, which is a Tongva village, where now this LA State Historic Park is, just north of Chinatown. And so that was another kind of surreal placement, because you're out on that land. You're in that valley of where, Echo Park, Dodger Stadium, Chinatown, Olvera Street, and seeing all of those histories intersect in that spot where this Tongva village was. But then, you're in a way watching this storyline that's referencing 300 years ago, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, and then there's a helicopter flying above you, reminding you where you are. So yeah, I don't know if did that answer your question. Unfortunately, it shut down, and I hope it comes back again in some other form.
Thank you for sharing all your work with us, or not all of your work, but much of your work with us this evening. I was just thinking of always carrying the recorder with you, always carrying the mic with you. And I guess my excuse for this question is that I heard of a new AI technology that's a kind of lapel pin that records everything and turns it into a transcript. That sounds like a nightmare to me. That's not your practice, obviously, but I'm wondering about how having the recorder with you kind of changes the way that you listen, and when you know, or what the act of editing is, or the act of selection is as a musical practice for you.
Yeah, I don't think, I might be doing it out of futility. I don't know if I could ever go back and listen to everything I've recorded. Even just that 10 days of Standing Rock, I'm still listening to it. And I listened to some of those files multiple times. Because I hear something new every time. So I have hard drives full of stuff I've never listened to. It might be impossible at this point to listen in real time to all of them back, especially now. Like, just got busy, but there's faith that there's something in there, that it's almost like a hoarding maybe. But I don't really do it. I mean, you don't see a field recorder on me now, so I'm not doing it all the time. But part of that impulse to do that was just what if something happened? What if I was able to at least be an audio witness to something? Maybe there's a person like the work of Lawrence Alejandro. It's like this can't end up in court. And it's good that some of this was at least witnessed, because you never know what's going to happen. So that's part of it too. But also, I scan these and yeah, there's significance in these events, in our presences there, the way we conduct ourselves in these places. But ultimately, I'm a musician still. I'm looking for sound in them too. So part of it is just simply that, just to see what I hear, to understand my own tastes of what I like to listen to. I think, to hear a rhythm I've never heard before, to hear a combination of sounds I've never heard before, to see how much I can even listen to something and place myself back there, like to recall my own experience there, to remember myself being there. So it has those other functions too. It's never to spy on anybody. I don't do that kind of thing. That'd be too crazy. But it's and a lot of it's just me
breathing like.
All right, so I think that's time for today. So thanks again, Raven,